Everyone wanted Mark Carney to wait out Donald Trump, but it turns out all Donald Trump had to do was wait out Mark Carney. We are seeing multiple concessions from Canada today. The Liberals have backed down on the new taxes they were going to introduce on the US media companies, but the details are so frustrating. Donald Trump also announced some new tariffs around the 301 investigations they've been doing in Canada, admitted, yep, we have a problem, and we will crack down on our supply chains. Which leads us to Project Beaver. Yep, that's the real name of a huge investment that's being made in Canada about changing some of the supply chains around the military purchases and development, which the US wants Canada to make as well, which is another concession that works well for Canada and the US, which we love to see. Speaking of, we've got an interesting update around some mining announcements that the US is happy to work with Canada on. It is exciting to see the plan finally start to shape up, especially since we need to take on a lot of shared problems, including the foreign entrepreneurs who are now putting out videos on how they can steal more money from Canada and the US. There's lots to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it. Alright, jumping into all of this trade stuff here, which once again is so funny to see, because these are concessions that Canada has made at the request of the US, where Canada benefits. US plans new levies, tariffs on dozens of countries, including Canada, as Trump looks to rebuild the tariff wall. The United States is proposing a new 10% tariff on Canada and other trading partners. So by the way, there's 60 countries involved in this 301 investigation. When it was first covered, the Canadian media spun it as if it was only Canada being targeted, which I found very funny at the time, like they're trying to hurt us in an attempt to rebuild the tariff wall that was struck down by the US Supreme Court earlier this year. However, the proposed tariff appears to maintain an exemption for Canadian products that comply with the rules of the USMCA agreement, a carve-out that would significantly reduce the bite of the tariffs. The office said the tariffs using Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act are being imposed because of Count's failure to curb imports of products made with forced labor, an allegation Canada and other US trade partners have disputed previously updated statements. Mark Carney has even said, that is something we need to put more priority on, and we've covered other situations where Canadian companies are bringing in foreign products that we have no way to track because they just lied about where it was coming from. They made false disclosures. I actually watched a really interesting YouTube video about this guy who was trying to make a product exclusively in America. One of the things that happened to him is one of the parts that he ordered actually ended up being relabeled from China. So he's like, whoa, this wasn't supposed to be from China, but the product they got was from China, because companies sometimes do that. And that needs to be looked into, because once again, the only people who lose are local populations when that happens. That being said, we also got this concession here, and the Liberal government admitted this would have hurt Canadians. And it in them admitting that this would have hurt Canadians shows how bad the rest of their plans are, and it shows how horrible the carbon taxes are. It's very funny. Canada backs off plan to force Netflix and Disney to spend more. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government will back down from a measure to force entertainment companies to make larger financial contributions to Canadian film and television productions. The government has ordered the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, to review the proposal, which would have required companies to spend 15% of their annual Canadian revenue on local content. And here's where the details became incredibly frustrating. Culture Minister Mark Miller announced $680 million to support Canadian content and said the government still expects the sector to contribute to Canadian culture, but has to make sure it's reasonable. So they were going to charge the US companies just to pay for Canadian content. Now instead, they're going to spend more taxpayer dollars. This is not the only taxpayer dollars that's being spent on Canadian content. This is in addition to billions they're already spending. Love that it's going to be borrowed, which means taxpayers get to foot the bill because almost all of the Canadian productions that end up getting access to this government money are nonsense TV shows. It's always junk, so it's great that now the taxpayers get to foot the bill of this made-up charge. But here's what's so funny to me, because Mark Carney's statements here say so much more about what the costs are to Canadians when the Liberal government, once again, not America, not Donald Trump, institutes new taxes on Canadians on the Canadian side of the border because he says it's a new cost for Canadians that they don't need right now. What about the carbon tax, Mark? Because they already admitted previously, we removed the consumer carbon tax to help with affordability of Canadians. Well, it's happening at the industrial level. This would have been a more industrial tax. It gets passed on to consumers when you increase charges on the back end. And in addition to frustrating details to this, The Conservatives had already tried to pass a motion to stop these charges from happening in the first place. They said, hey, let's make sure we don't charge the American companies 15%. Mark Carney himself voted nay. He voted no. The Liberals shut down that motion and said, we're going to keep it going. Then Donald Trump and the Americans came over and said, you're going to drop that tax. And they said, okay, yes, sir, we will drop that tax. And you know what? We'll say it's an affordability thing for Canadians. And now we get to take the credit on removing our own tax that we had instituted. Good job, guys. It is another step to reinforce affordability for Canadians. This is not the time to raise the cost for Canadians. When the CRTC takes decisions as they did last summer, with respect to telecom and telecom sharing on broadband, which help to lower costs for Canadians. We're very much in support, but this is not the time to make Canadians pay another $50. Not the time to make Canadians pay more money. It's a step in the right direction for affordability of Canadians. They shot it down previously. Now that they're making concessions to the Americans, it's a good idea done by the Liberals. Which, don't get me wrong, I do think it's a good idea. Yeah, I thought it was a good idea when the Conservatives brought it forward to cancel it in the first place. And I'm glad this is now the second time a Liberal government themselves have stated that extra taxes get passed on to the consumer. So let's remember that moving forward when they call us crazy for that, and the trend of concessions is continuing, which is perhaps good for Canada-US relationships. I'm excited when I see the concessions being made, because the two concessions we just made benefit Canadians. This is my favorite thing. All the times the talking heads are like, well, they're asking us to do X, Y, Z. Well, they've got these 5 to 8 concessions they want us to do just to get to the table. And you go through all of the concessions and every single one of them benefits Canadians. And you're like, well, why don't we just do that anyways? Like, that's policy that we want done anyways. But the tone has clearly switched and Table Salt put this out here. I have a strong feeling the US is going to come hard for Canada now. I feel like we haven't seen anything yet. Why? Mark Carney's behavior. He knows something. And speaking of knowing something, here's a Dominic LeBlanc. And we are seeing the tone is shifting, and that's why I keep saying the Eye of Sauron, which is the tough trade negotiations, has not been on Canada because the Trump administration has had so many other things to deal with that were not CUSMA USMCA negotiations. Look at this compilation put together here. Shout out to RMC86 for putting this out. Look at how many times he basically said, yeah, we're in for a rough ride when it comes to the negotiations. This trip has not been without some turbulence. We've all been in context where there's turbulence. I do not underestimate the potential moments of turbulence that could occur in the next few weeks and months. Don't take your seatbelt off and run up and down the aisle and kick in the cockpit door. You remain focused on the work that you need to do, and you come through the turbulence very much focused on the outcome. Just back-to-back compilation of him being like, it's going to be a rough landing, people. So, don't come and kick down the door to the cockpit. Don't come after the pilots, aka the Canadian government. Just focus on the outcomes, focus on these other things, but there's going to be a lot of turbulence. Great to see from our leadership team there. Anyways, another example of why these concessions are positive. We've got Flavio Vulp here, and he's always working for the Canadian auto industry, trying to find ways to make sure we can navigate these trade negotiations. And he's saying, I'm seeing real signs of a working path back to Canada-US trade peace on new section.